Hello and welcome to the lecture Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of the American City. My name is Leon Sultan. I'm an AP Human Geography teacher at Abraham Lincoln High School in San Francisco, California. We're going to go over 4 key questions, so let's get started. Key question number 1. How did railroads affect the size and form of cities in the United States between 1870 and 1920? So we're really going to look at the birth of the American city, and we can see in the background here we have a city in the 1800s. It's New York. We have horse-drawn carriages. And with the increase of railroads, which we can see on this map, the size and form of cities drastically changed. So if we look at the top map, we can see how railroads were extending towards the west, but by the 1890s, they extended really over the entire North American continent. So looking at cities during this time, we can see that the American city had a huge growth spurt during this era. So addressing the question, how did railroads affect the size of American cities during this era? Well, the idea would be cities grew in size and population because increased connectivity led to increased migration and immigration to cities, both internal migration in the US as well as international migration. Railroads also stimulated economic growth in other industries, which then created jobs and increased the economic pull factor. So the two things are really tied together. Now let's look at form. How did railroads affect the form of cities in the US from 1870 to 1920? The CBD, or Central Business District, emerged and expanded due to increased economic growth and migration. So here we have an example of the Burgess model, or the concentric zone model, and we can see from the middle the CBD expands outward. Okay. Additionally, industrial corridors emerged and expanded, creating a hub and spoke pattern to development. This is reflected in the sector or Hoyt model, and we can see right here where we have a transportation corridor right next to an industrial corridor, and that's a direct result of the growth of the railroads. Let's move on to key question number 2. Key question number 2, how did the interstate highway system affect the development of cities between 1950 and today? So the interstate highway system promotes the usage of cars. Looking back again at the same model, we can see how the interstate highway system leads to the growth of suburbs. That's right, those are suburbs. Suburban development really increased due to the interstate highway system. So if we look at our models here, we are moving away from the concentric zone and sector model towards the multiple nuclei model. So the number one factor was suburbanization. Suburbanization increased the amount of people living outside city, commuting into the city both for work and for shopping or economic activities, and the decline of the central business district. So economic activities relocate outside of the CBD to highways, interchanges, creating edge cities. This is leading to the decline of the American city. So an example of one of these edge cities is very close to where we live in Walnut Creek. Walnut Creek, California is located, as we would predict, at the interchange between Highway 24 and Highway 680. So moving on with key question number 3, what factors led to segregation as well as economic and population declines in the American city? Let's take a look at a map. What does this map show? Well, reading the legend, we can see residential security map, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. The 4th grade is in red. This map shows a practice called redlining, and this map was produced by the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1937. That was a New Deal program designed to help people maintain their homes. However, another map, last one was San Francisco, this one is Oakland, and these maps were drawn by the federal government and used by the federal government and banks, and they would not lend money to buy or improve homes in specific neighborhoods. And we can see those neighborhoods are red, and that's why it's called redlining. Redlining creates a downward spiral, and the reason being, without loans, poor neighborhoods became more and more run down. This leads to the decline of the American city. Now, another thing that led to segregation was racist housing covenants. Here we can see a nice typical street in our Sunset District in California, here in San Francisco, and believe it or not, in the Sunset District, developers wrote into housing contracts that homes could never be sold nor rented to non-whites, even after the original sale. Now, these no longer exist, but this explains why segregation persisted in certain neighborhoods in major urban areas. Additionally, we have the practice of block busting, which was the rapid change in racial composition of residential blocks in American cities that occurs when real estate agents stir up fears of neighborhood decline after encouraging people of color to move into previously white neighborhoods. And this leads directly to white flight. Below is a map of Detroit, and we can see how segregated it is right along 8 Mile Road. So all of this leads to, eventually, these practices are outlawed, but all this leads to then in practice or de facto segregation. If we look at maps from cities all over the country, like Detroit, like Chicago, like Los Angeles, what we observe is just the massive amounts of de facto segregation along racial lines. And much of this had its roots in redlining, blockbusting, and these racial covenants. So moving through, we can see here San Francisco, our city. So what we have is Detroit, which grew due to railroads and then highways, and then started to decline because of highways, because of white flight, because of redlining and blockbusting. So the recap of the story of the American city: we have an increase in size, then we have white flight, suburbanization, and the decline of the central business district. Now we're going to move forward and talk about gentrification, new urbanism, and the revitalized CBDs. So key question number 4, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, what factors led to the revitalization and growth in the American city? And we're going to look at a specific movement called new urbanism. Now, revitalize means to bring something back to life. And let's take a look at what some of these downtown plans and actual downtown cities look like. Here's a plan for downtown Detroit, and here's an actual picture of downtown Detroit from Comerica Park, which is where the Tigers play. And we can see the context with all this new development happening around the CBD in Detroit, leading to a revitalization. So part of that is mixed-use development, and here we can see a plan for mixed-use development in San Francisco in a neighborhood called South Beach, and here's actual mixed-use development in the same neighborhood. So we're going to focus on a movement called new urbanism, and we're going to identify the goals, explain the difference between mixed-use and traditional zoning, explain the benefits of mixed-use development, and finally the criticisms of new urbanism as a movement. So let's take a look at new urbanism defined. It's outlined by a group of architects, urban planners, and developers from over 20 countries, and it's an urban design that calls for development, urban revitalization, and suburban reforms that create walkable neighborhoods with a diversity of housing and jobs. Now, the goals of new urbanism are to reduce urban sprawl and suburbanization, to increase pedestrian-friendly and bike-friendly areas, a goal of sustainability, making transportation more environmentally friendly and energy efficient. In other words, using less cars or having shorter commute times, using more buses, using more bike commutes, etc. And then also green building and outdoor use areas and denser developments instead of the kind of sprawl. So here we can see an example of mixed-use development. This is located again in the South Beach area of San Francisco, near where the Giants play in the ballpark and where the new Warriors Stadium is going to be built. And we can see how on the ground floor of this condo is a Whole Foods. So this is an example of mixed-use development, which is residential and commercial development happening in the same zone and or building. And this is contrasted with traditional zoning, which puts residential and commercial development happening in different zones and mandates that they must be separate. Two examples are, in traditional zoning, we have a neighborhood like Twin Peaks here in San Francisco, where it's 100% residential. There's no shops, no corner stores, nothing. It's 100% homes. And we're going to contrast that with a mixed-use development on Ocean Avenue. Ocean Avenue really has always been mixed use with a mix of shops and transportation. But here's a newer development that was built on Ocean Avenue fairly recently. And again, there's a Whole Foods close by. There is transportation. There are new residences. So what are some of the benefits to mixed-use development? Well, commute time and cost decreases. It's environmentally friendly, so less use of cars and less pollution. It's better for the environment. increased social interaction and sense of community because it's built in with these outdoor spaces so that people can interact. You have increased business for retail outlets, as well as increased property values and revitalization of cities. So, new urbanism sounds great so far. However, there are some criticisms that have been aimed at new urbanism. The first is that high housing costs still favors upper income residents and causes displacement of the poor and gentrification. So, new urbanism does not really address the needs of lower income people who live in cities, and it continues this trend of de facto segregation. So, it does nothing to address the racial segregation that we had observed in the previous slides. And also many mixed-use developments really look similar, and it creates more of a sense of placelessness in unique places. Okay, that concludes our lecture. Remember to please like and subscribe to Sultan Geography, the YouTube channel. Again, my name is Leon Sultan, AP Human Geography teacher from Abraham Lincoln High School in San Francisco, California. I hope that you enjoyed the lecture and that it was informative. Like and subscribe.